your finger out of my face, so it'll pick you up with a sieve.
Don't try it.
Oh, wait. I'll speak to you when you're well-dressed.
Who are you? You unfunny, lucky, stupid...
Stop calling me a crypto-Nazi. Let's stop calling names. You in your goddamn face.
You know, it's the kind of guy I am.
Yeah, okay.
And I was saying to your wife the other night,
Welcome to Rockefeller Center and doing live television for me.
Thank you.
I think it's great.
Saturday Night Live is an American institution, a comedy juggernaut that has entertained billions since its historic inception in 1975. When it began, it was a colossal cultural shift, a show for the young, the relevant, and the cool. The guest hosts were stars at the zenith of their notoriety. However, in April 14th, 1979, in the spirit of the show's avant-garde nature, they gave the role of host to a 70-year-old television pioneer, Milton Berle.
I mean, when you meet people today and you talk about Berle, what's the best thing they can say about him? He's funny, he's funny, he's funny. Well, I'm out to prove that Berle is not funny.
It was a toxic clash between old and new school entertainment, the haves and the have-beens, that led to the episode being banned from being rebroadcast for 24 years, and the host banned for life. Let me tell you the story of Milton Berle and Saturday Night Live. Before we get to the infamous episode, let me tell you where both were up until this point. As a whole, Berle's career as an entertainer spanned over 8 decades. First in silent films and on stage as a child actor, then in radio, movies, and television. He's one of the rare few who can boast that they've appeared in films with both Buster Keaton and Keenan and Kel.
nice to meet you.
I wish I could say the same.
Isn't he a hoot?
Well, who's not exactly the word I was thinking of.
Look, young man, if I wanted to be insulted, I could go home and read my fan mail. It's false. Keep sending in those postcards.
Berle's comedy style was rapid delivery, accompanied with slapstick, facial contortions, ad-libbing, and showed a willingness to elicit laughter at any cost. Therefore, him and television was a match made in heaven. He'd appear with a cigar that would become his lifelong trademark, a habit that he'd wisely started since the age of 12. In 1948, he was given his own show, Texaco's Star Theatre, which launched him to nationwide stardom. Television was still in its infancy. No one had yet figured out what a TV variety show might look like. No one knew who might watch or how TV might help a career. It was only after Berle's success that the likes of Lucille Ball and Sid Caesar saw its true career value. Berle was the first entertainer to have an instinctive grip on the new dynamics of television. During the 5 years the show aired, American homes that contained television sets grew from 500,000 to nearly 20 million. Eventually, Americans became so addicted to Tuesday nights with Milton that he boasted an incredible 97% Nielsen rating. This huge proportion of audiences sitting in front of their TV screens caused theaters, restaurants, and bars to close their doors during Berle's show. In 1951, NBC signed the popular comic to a 30-year contract that paid him $200,000 a year, whether he appeared on TV or not. His fellow comics started to notice something fascinating about his material. There was something they connected with, and then it struck them. It was their material. Berle was blatantly taking jokes from other comedians. This resulted in a subtle nickname for Berle. Walter Winchell bestowed upon him the moniker, the Thief of Bad Gags. Berle was quite upfront about borrowing jokes from other comedians. Berle never disputed it. In fact, he leaned into it. He once said after watching a rival comedian's act, "I laughed so hard, I nearly dropped my pencil."
And it's always nostalgic when Milton appears on a dais with other comedians. It's kind of like going back and paying a visit to your material.
As more people purchased televisions, however, more programs arrived on the air, meaning that Berle faced increased competition. When the ratings for his show began to decline, NBC imposed a more rigid format, which did not allow Berle to be as outrageous or freewheeling as he'd had been in his earlier years. Texaco dropped his sponsorship in 1953 and Buick took over. Ratings had plummeted and he was dropped. Sitcoms like I Love Lucy and Sergeant Bilko were becoming more fashionable and more popular than variety shows, and the relentless presence of Berle had seemingly exhausted viewers.
Again, it's a great pleasure for me to be in your living room every Tuesday night.
Not in our living room.
When the medium started to mature, his false noses, frantic costume changes, and aggressive, bombastic jokes began to seem dated.
Well, let's get the show off on the right foot, huh?
Since he was contractually still tied to NBC, he was unable to work for other TV networks, so they tried to make use of him wherever they could. For example, the surprisingly short-lived Jackpot Bowling. They tried Berle in other short-lived series, but the audiences just weren't the same. Realizing they may have been a little hasty with their contract, NBC changed it to allow Berle to work for other networks, and his yearly salary was cut to a measly $120,000 a year. In 1966, he appeared in another Milton Berle show for the ABC network, but the series lasted less than 1 year.
Instantly. Notice, what do you call the process for extracting the scent from blossoms? Bar all entrances.
Through the 1970s, Uncle Milty would still be seen in the occasional movie and was still a consistent TV regular, acting and making guest appearances on the very medium that made him an icon.
What can I say complimentary about our next speaker, Milton Berle, that hasn't already been said by Milton Berle?
And it's well worth mentioning at this point both his off and on-screen reputation. He was known for hogging the spotlight, stealing scenes and inserting himself into other acts. On his variety show and in his stage performances that predated it, he would bring on great performers, but rarely allow them to have the stage to themselves.
Someone must have stomped on his head with those blue suede shoes.
Jugglers would only get to juggle for a little bit before Uncle Milty came bounding out in juggler garb and make a shambles of their routine. George Burns, his friend, once said, it always had to be about him. If the bit wasn't about him, he would make it about him. Berle would argue that by injecting himself into another performer's act, that he kept the performer on stage longer than they would otherwise, and gave them the prestige of co-starring with the star of the show. Now let's see the genesis of Saturday Night Live. In the mid-1970s, Johnny Carson requested NBC stop using his Tonight Show reruns on weekends and air them in the week to have more time off his busy schedule. NBC head Herb Schlosser tapped Dick Ebersol to develop a new show for the time slot. Ebersol approached Lorne Michaels, who pitched the idea of a comedy variety show with musical guests. Saturday Night Live was the original name sought by Michaels and Ebersol due to the show's live broadcast, but the name was unavailable. ABC was developing a similar variety show for primetime Saturday, hosted by Howard Cosell, which had already been named Saturday Night Live with Howard Cosell. As a result, the new show on NBC debuted under the simpler name Saturday Night. Then suddenly ABC cancelled Cosell's show after 18 episodes due to poor ratings, and NBC purchased the name, renaming their new show Saturday Night Live. Needing actors for the new show, Ebersola Michaels turned to Second City. They poached Gilda Radner and Dan Aykroyd. They also hired John Belushi and Chevy Chase from the National Lampoon's Lemming, as well as Garrett Morris, Jane Curtin, Lorraine Newman, then Bill Murray. Rather than having a regular host, SNL was conceived as having a different guest host each week. Lorne was more proud of who he wouldn't have on the show. People may have appeared all over Vegas or primetime TV, but they were of the other generation. They didn't want those considered big names, but people who reflected the cultural moment, like Michael Palin of Life of Brian or Jodie Foster of Taxi Driver. The new show debuted on October the 11th, 1975 at Rockefeller Center. The first host, George Carlin.
When it comes to bullshit, big time, major league bullshit.
The format was uncertain at first. The amount of time devoted to sketches, music, and stand-up varied widely, as well as the inclusion of Jim Henson's Muppets and pre-filmed content by Albert Brooks. One new sketch that remained permanently was the Weekend Update, an invention of Chevy Chase. Chevy was the original head writer, and he wrote the segment for himself.
I'm God. Here's the news.
The live comedy series was designed to appeal to viewers aged 18 to 34, mixing satire, social commentary, observation, and a fresh, edgy comedy style that the younger generation were thirsting for.
Every time you buy pot from Mexico or Colombia, you're putting an American out of work.
SNL was blunt and gutsy, never pandering to the audience. The writers' and performers' philosophy was that it's better to aim high and miss than aim low and get a cheap laugh. The consensus was, we're not coming to you, you've got to come to us. It exuded a certain contempt for the bad habits and tired formulas of variety shows like audience pandering and faux sincerity.
This could have not been possible, ladies and gentlemen. Again, I say, without the aid of you very wonderful viewers that keep watching our show.
So on April the 14th, 1979, to add some kitsch value to the program and to reach an olive branch to the older generation, they chose Milton Berle to host. SNL were achieving their most successful year ever in viewership figures. What had they got to lose?
What was he like? Did he relate well to you guys, or?
Well, he's a monster. Berle's a monster. You know?
He was?
Yeah.
Lorne Michaels at first resisted having Berle on, but Gene Domanian said, how could we not? After all, he was Mr. Television, Uncle Milty, the king of NBC. At the start of production, the cast was thrilled to be in the presence of somebody who'd been famous since the days of vaudeville, especially John Belushi. Berle regaled them with all sorts of old stories. NBC Vice President Rick Ludwin saw the downside because Milton assumed that he was not hosting Saturday Night Live. Milton assumed they were doing Texaco Star Theatre. And as Milton sometimes did, he took over production and tried to make it his own, as opposed to being the host. And his anecdotes started to become a little wearisome. Brian Doyle Murray said during rehearsals, Uncle Milty has an anecdote for every word. On the first day of rehearsals, Berle announced to Lorne that he'd only seen the show once, creating an immediate concern that he didn't know how the show worked. Also gave off an air of aloof arrogance.
I know. You want my autograph.
He didn't need to prepare, he could just show up and the episode would be a smash hit. He also declared that the cast were truly the stars of tomorrow, forgetting that, in fact, they were actually the stars of today, and him the star of, well, yesterday. Berle would pitch ideas prefaced with the warning, now, this might be over your heads.
What are you laughing at?
And affectionately called everyone Booby. John Belushi idolized Berle from his childhood and cut the aging star some slack. Belushi even laid into the show's writers, yelling, "You guys are writing shit for this great man." During a taped promo, he introduced male jazz musical guest Ornette Coleman. He then paused, mugged at the camera saying, "Who's she?" infuriating Coleman's manager. Lorne Michaels stared at a monitor during rehearsals, looking at Berle wearing a garish wig, saying, "This is meant to be a touching scene," and he keeps sticking a cigar up his nose, yelling at the director that by doing this, he gets 2 laughs instead of 1. Later on, Bill Murray stormed into Lorne's office stressing, "You know where this sketch is going? One way, down." Rehearsing a sketch with Gilda Radner in an old people's home, while Gilda delivered her serious lines, Milton would be dribbling out food, trying to upstage her. Lorne kept relaying to Berle the mantra of the show, that it isn't about getting laughs, it's about attitudes. Berle would put his arm around him and say, I know, satire." Shortly before showtime, writer Rosie Schuster was sent to Uncle Milty's dressing room to deliver one simple, important note, which was, do not go overboard on the spit takes. But Milton was only focused on his opening monologue, pacing around in his boxer shorts, testing jokes. As he left the dressing room for the stage, she yelled, "Milton, don't be broad!" And he wasn't. He was even broader. The episode opened nicely with a nostalgic parody of his old Texaco show, harkening back to his heyday, but things would go rapidly downhill from there. As the show was live, he was told he only had a 5-minute monologue. As Berle enters, he drags out the audience applause to self-masturbatory levels, wasting at least 1 minute straight out of the gate. The discipline vanishes immediately. Instead of a 5-minute monologue, he tries improvising, ad-libbing. Instead of doing topical material or talking about his experiences rehearsing the show, Berle immediately launches into the kind of one-liners that died with vaudeville, but he's still used in his act ever since.
I got bad news. My wife ran away with my best friend, and I miss him.
Berle references people, clothing, the crowd, things previously unseen because Saturday Night Live is a rigidly rehearsed and intricately choreographed show.
So this show, what the hell?
Uncle Milty had asked for a stagehand to drop a pipe outside of the camera's view during the opening monologue, so that Berle could fire off a scripted ad-lib. He was told no. However, he still made it happen whether Lorne wanted to or not.
NBC just dropped another show.
Totally antithetical to what the show was about. When jokes didn't land, he references that fact.
Here's another one you may not care for. I have a lot of these, Jim.
While on camera, Berle is told that he needs to stop his monologue, as his 5 minutes...
That's it? The monologue's through?
And now up. And then, as the camera's about to fade to black, Berle can be clearly seen angrily chewing out the Saturday Night Live crew. During a commercial break, he told Michaels that he'd arranged for a standing ovation from the people sitting in the balcony, who had been comped tickets by Berle, which was exactly the old-school, sentimental, self-aggrandizing show-ending format that SNL were avoiding at all costs. There was a sketch about people with big arses that was generally bad, Milton mugging and talking over the actors, a sketch with Milton as a bar owner auditioning terrible acts. Bill Murray plays a bad stand-up comic, like he's taking the mickey out of Berle's monologue. The sketch was far too long, the audience impatient, waiting for a big reveal that never came. He plays an old man in a nursing home in a very slow sketch, at one point grabbing Jane Curtin's arse, cracking a cheeky one-liner. Difficult to know if this was another ad-lib, as you can sense the impatience of a single laugh. He does his contractually obliged and negotiated spit take, and makes the most of the opportunity to an applause of around 5. The sketch ends with Milton pinching Jane's arse yet again, as he looks solemnly off into the distance. The deafening silence of the crowd, making it touchingly and creepily poignant. Referencing his legendary plagiarism, his last sketch is him introducing his gag writers, Irving, Sid, Mel, Marty. The big reveal when they come on stage is, yes, you guessed it, they're Japanese. Milton speaks to them in a strange dialect that he's certainly not fluent in, and with a level of sensitivity you'd expect from a 70-year-old in 1979. For the show ending, the September song plays in the background as he sits on a stool, talking about his career and his new book, as well as his many accolades. The occasional one-line is thrown out with sentimentality oozing out of every pore, welling up with showbiz tears.
I see all these young performers here, great ones, and I think of myself when I was their age.
As he delivers his tribute to himself. He was then greeted with the planned standing ovation from the people he'd invited to the show, who rose to their feet just as he'd instructed. Lorne said it was just bizarre. The idea of an arranged standing ovation is just a part of show business we were trying to separate ourselves from, so he made sure the cameraman cut away from the prepared ovation as quickly as possible. At the end, as the performers waved goodbye, Aykroyd walks off the stage, seemingly aggravated, and a clearly unimpressed Bill Murray resolutely standing, arms folded. But an excited Belushi looks like a child seeing Santa, vigorously shaking his hand, encouraging more and more applause for one of his comedy heroes.
Good night, everyone. Thank you.
Lorne was so upset with the way Berle steamrolled over the production that he never wanted the show to see the light of day again. And it wasn't until 2003. Watching the episode, it was clear Milton did what he wanted at the beginning and at the end. And even though it wasn't on brand with SNL's style, they surely knew exactly what they were getting when they hired him. I've seen fantastic sketches of this era, but the sketches he was in weren't very funny, and I doubt any performer could have made them so. If anything, he was quite reserved in them, and if anything, he was given the least to do in all of them. I feel if Milton were to have done this in 1999 instead, Lorne and the rest of the cast would have leaned into the showbiz nostalgia instead of resisting it so strongly. As they were only 4 years into building the show, SNL were naturally put on the defensive. In summary, leading up to the SNL debacle, Berle was seen as a living television icon, but his comedy style and sensibilities never kept up with the times. He didn't reinvent himself for the new generations in the same way that Groucho Marx or Don Rickles did. Saturday Night Live was at its peak and assumed perhaps naively they could make anything work, and maybe Milton would be more compliant considering his peak was 25 years before, and they were after all the hottest show in the country. Though it's obvious now that recalibrating SNL into his own image did give him the feeling of power that he hadn't had for decades, and you can't blame him for taking advantage of that. Since the garish episode aired, SNL is still going strong today, pulling in millions of viewers, producing countless stand-up TV and film stars, and superb sketches that resonate now as they did when they were originally broadcast. It's a show that's always fought hard to reflect the society and culture of the moment. It gave comedy and the TV industry a much-needed shot in the arm and remains one of the last shows that can be classed as appointment television.
Arthur has been so kind.
Yeah, kind of a jerk, that's what he is. You're all a bunch of jerks.
Well,
with Milton, his life not only spanned nearly the entire 20th century, but it also covered almost all of its pop culture as well. After SNL, he still appeared in movies, television, films, chat shows and theatres, right up until his passing in 2002. His constant hunger to perform and be seen didn't let people forget about him, even if they wanted to. And he fortunately lived long enough to be honoured and appreciated for the true pioneer that he was.
This award is without a doubt the most recent.
Lorne Michaels has since softened on Milton Berle, saying that he now can see where the veteran comic was coming from, saying, "Milton Berle I was just not prepared for. I'm more sympathetic to him now than I was in 1979, adding, he had ruled this place for so many years, and we were the kids telling him no."